Okay, this is going to be another basketball book review. This is going to be Blood in the Garden, The Flagrant History of the 1990s Knicks, written by Chris Herren. So we're looking at this picture here, and just want to give you some background. The guy to the far left is John Starks. He pretty much wore his heart on his sleeve. That's what John Starks is pretty much known for. And we got Patrick Ewing, number 33, the franchise player. And then we got Pat Riley, the head coach with the slick black hair and the Armani suit. And then we got Charles Oakley, the enforcer. And then we got the polarizing Anthony Mason. I like this picture. You know, even though the 99 Knicks are my favorite team, I think this core here really embodies, what the 90s Knicks were all about. So I'm very happy that they put Pat Riley on the picture as well, because Riley deserves the most credit for getting this thing turned around. He's definitely the story of the book. And at the same time, he really becomes like the villain when you look at halfway through the decade, when he ends up becoming Riley the Rat, being the traitor, and wanting, a little bit greedy and wanting part ownership, and takes a deal with Miami. But yeah, one of the reasons I love doing these book reviews, it always answers a lot of questions. I mean, throughout the years, people have always asked me, like, how come Riley, didn't get ownership with the Knicks, or how come he didn't take out Starks in Game 7, and how come this happened, how come that happened? And, the book really does answer a lot of questions. And, it's just a fascinating transition between Riley and Van Gundy, everything that went down here with the coaching situation. But yeah, with Pat Riley, just want to focus on him first. He has a fascinating story. He was a really good player at the University of Kentucky, averaging 22 points a game one season. But when he got to the NBA, he was pretty much more of a role player, would come off the bench, play good defense. His career was pretty much cut short by injury, ended up taking a job with the Lakers as a color analyst for Chick Hearn. And, there was a situation with the coaching situation where Jack McKinney got into the injury, which the HBO series pretty much accurately documented. And then when Westhead took over as the head coach, Magic wanted to be traded because he just wasn't a fan of the offense. And because of that, Jerry Buss actually fired Westhead. And Jerry West at the time, could have taken the coaching job, but he actually decided to give Pat Riley the keys. And Riley ended up being the coach of the Lakers. And the rest is history. Riley had a reputation of, during the games, he would let the guys do their thing. They were the Showtime Lakers, run and gun. That's what Magic wanted to do. So he pretty much catered towards the Showtime style that Magic wanted to run with the Lakers. But during the Showtime run, though, Riley was very, he worked them hard in terms of conditioning, in terms of drills, in terms of measuring body fat, things like that. And then at the same time, it put a lot of pressure on everybody, too. It almost seemed to me like the Lakers weren't really able to enjoy the 1987 championship because he guaranteed that they were going to repeat. Pat Riley's stance was that, yeah, anybody can win an NBA championship once, which is not really true, but you see what he's saying. You could win it one time, but true greatness is defined by doing something over and over again. He wanted the Lakers to become a dynasty, and so he guaranteed that the Lakers were going to win it again in 1988. But I think that just put a lot of pressure on the team. And by the time he get to 1989, he actually trademarked the phrase three-peat. So if the Lakers were going to three-peat, Riley was going to cash in with all these royalties with his company that he trademarked the three-peat phrase from. So I think a lot of Magic even stated that a lot of players were upset that the coach was making more money than the players, and he had his own game with Sega Genesis. And I think a lot of people just saw the maybe the motivation for Riley was so he could cash in himself rather than the actual players. So a lot of people took it different ways. Riley had this phrase in his book called "the disease of me," and a lot of players started to think, was the disease of me actually passing on to Pat Riley? But I think Riley meant by the disease of me that You had to be all about the team. And when you started, doing things for yourself away from the team, that's what he meant by disease of me. But he was pretty much, in for someone, getting as much money as they could get if you really truly deserved it. So there's two different meanings of the disease of me. I think some people kind of misinterpreted what he meant by that phrase, the disease of me. But the bottom line is, by this point, the Lakers had gotten, the players, it pretty much ran its course. And I think Riley actually sensed that. And I believe it was more of a mutual agreement that he, stopped coaching the Lakers in 1990. They actually had their best record in the 89-90 season. They were 63-19, but for whatever reason, they lost to the Phoenix Suns in the second round. And, Riley decided to leave. I think it was a mutual agreement that things had just ran their course with the Lakers at that time. So he actually took a job with NBC and Bob Costas for that first year. That was the same year where Jordan won his first NBA championship. And, the Bulls had just, swept the Knicks in the 91 playoffs. So there was, the Knicks were looking for a head coach. Riley wanted to coach New York. He, at the time, you really had to have like a dominant big man. Especially that was Riley's mindset, going back to the 80s with Kareem, with the 90s with Ewing, and then eventually with Alonzo Mourning. That was kind of like the criteria. Like, you need a big man to win in the NBA. So Riley wasn't going to take the job with the Knicks unless Patrick Ewing was on board. Ewing was actually trying to force a trade even after Riley got there. But Riley actually had to sit down with Ewing and said, wouldn't it mean a lot to you to, bring a championship to New York? I mean, doesn't it mean anything to you that, they were able to have a parade in Times Square or on Fifth Avenue and, celebrating a championship? And that's something that Riley was doing the whole summer. He would go on these jogs in Malibu and just envision bringing a championship to New York. So he was really big on, if you wanted to achieve something, you got to envision it happening before it actually happens. And somehow, some way, he talked Ewing into staying. And Ewing decided that he was not going to force a trade. And this 1991-92 season, this is the year where everything got turned around. They had a pretty good record. They were 51-31, but they kind of got off to a slow start. Really, the most fascinating part about this first year is the training camp. They actually had training camp in Charleston, South Carolina. Maybe they just wanted to get away from the city. I'm not sure why they had it so far away in the South. But the first day of training camp, a lot of wild stories came out of it. I mean, the court got so soaked up in sweat that they had to move courts. Starks even mentioned this before in other interviews, that they had to bring out garbage cans because he was running guys so hard that they had to throw up. And just a lot of crazy stuff happened. There was actually a box out drill between Xavier McDaniel and Anthony Mason. And these are like two of the toughest guys in the league. And at the time, Mason was just, he was just playing for the CBA, and I think he had a really good showing in the summer league. So he was fighting for his life to try to stay on this team. And then Xavier McDaniel had a reputation of being like the toughest, probably one of the toughest guys in the league. Later on that year in the playoffs, him and Jordan had that stare down after he was bullying Pippen. So you get the point. X-Man and Mason are probably two of the biggest gung-ho studs in the NBA, and they're just knocking each other out with blows after every single box out drill. And every single time they tried to box each other out, it just ended with them just throwing punches at each other, and they had to be separated. And I don't even know if either guy was able to get through the first practice, but it was just a sign that this was just going to be an intense, every single practice, every single game was going to be life or death. And that's what really Riley brought to the table, like that, that do or die mentality. But yeah, they actually got off to a slow start that first year. There was actually a turning point during the season where they were in a hotel room and he split everybody up. He put everybody into four different corners. He separated the rookies. He separated the white guys. He separated the veterans. He separated, the young guards, and he just said we're too clique oriented. He said, everyone's in a clique, and we're not going to achieve anything unless we come together. So that was really a big turning point throughout that season, and you got to give them credit. So this 91-92 team, even though it's not the best record, even though they didn't make it the furthest, I'd have to say I would think this is the best Knicks team from the 90s, because they were one of the only teams that took the Bulls to 7 games. They actually won the first game in Chicago Stadium. The difference with this first team is you had Xavier McDaniel, you had Mark Jackson at point guard. And I've stated this before in the 92-93 rewind that, the only game 7s during the Bulls championship run, the point guard, both games, is actually Mark Jackson. So you can't take that away from Mark Jackson. But and then you had Gerald Wilkins, who was actually the Jordan stopper. I believe Gerald Wilkins might have been a free agent after this season, and he actually signed with Cleveland, which kind of made sense for them because Starks was really catching on. He was a 6th man. You could see Starks' being hungry, his athleticism, and so it definitely made sense that Riley was going to start John Starks the next season. So you understand getting rid of Gerald Wilkins. But the one guy Riley regrets not bringing back is X-Man. This is the only year that they had X-Man. And, people still talk about Xavier McDaniel in the Knicks to this day. He really kind of gave them that extra layer of toughness that's always been missing. And they actually brought in Doc Rivers and Charles Smith. And, Charles Smith was very, very soft compared to X-Man. He might have been a little bit more talented, but I think a lot of people to this day still would agree, X-Man was a better fit than Charles Smith for the New York Knicks. And it's funny, like the very next year, they had the best record in the East. They were 60-22. So they definitely had a better record the next year, but I just think, playoff wise, I don't know if they've ever had a better team than that 91-92 playoff run. And I remember I actually went to Game 6 at the Garden in 92. I just remember the energy, people waving towels, people were actually hugging each other, coming off the escalator. I mean, it was crazy. I've never seen energy like that. And it really did make me want to, fall in love with the game. And that was probably, and at the time, I was actually rooting for Jordan in that game, but yeah, Jordan did not play well. He couldn't get anything going to the paint. He knew he was going to get fouled anytime he drove the ball, and he did not have a good shooting game at all. He only had like 21 points. That's the same game where Starks actually clotheslined Pippen. So if anyone wants to see that game, it was May 17th, 1992, Game 6 at Madison Square Garden. That's the first NBA game I ever went to, and it almost changed my life. It really did. So really did change my life, to be honest with you. And then, the next year in 92-93, they brought in Charles Smith and Doc Rivers. Yeah, you can't argue with what they did in the regular season. They only lost 4 games at home. The first round against Indiana, they beat them 4-1 pretty easily. But it really kind of planted the seeds for how much of a pain in the ass Reggie Miller was going to be for the next couple of years. Starks actually headbutted Reggie, I believe it was in game 3, and then Ewing and Oakley, start yelling at Starks, and Starks actually got ejected, and I believe he actually said, "I'm going to cut his dick off and make him eat it." But you could just see that Reggie was going to be a nuisance from there on out. So they beat Indiana, then they beat the Hornets and LJ and Alonzo Mourning pretty easily in 5 games, and then obviously they lose to the Bulls in 6. But I'll tell you, when you look at this Eastern Conference Finals against the Bulls in 93, it really looked like Starks was on the verge of, superstardom. It looked like he was going to be like the next, money man in the league. One of the faces of the league. He played that well on both ends of the court. He actually, shut Jordan down in these first 2 games. This is not like he shut him down, but Jordan had very, very poor shooting nights in Game 1 and Game 2. And, Starks ended Game 2 with this beautiful drive. He was actually going right, and then he actually finishes with his left hand as Horace Grant and Jordan jump up, and then they just back off, and Starks throws it down, and City explodes. So the Knicks are actually up 2-0 on the Bulls. That was the only time the Bulls actually were ever, down, I think, in a playoff series during the championship run. And then the series just totally, changes once they got back to Chicago. I mean, Starks was just so, erratic, kicking the ball into the stands, trash talking with everybody. He just, I don't know. He just really, he didn't deliver what he delivered in the first two games. And it was almost like, man, he's just not going to be that. He's just not a consistent player, that type of thing. But, game 5 to me is always going to be, without a doubt, probably the biggest win the Bulls ever gotten than their championship reign. To win a game 5 in Madison Square Garden where they barely even lost that whole year. That was a huge victory for the Bulls. But, it's always going to be known as the Charles Smith game. And I've talked about this before, but, I've always felt like Ewing deserves a lot of the blame, too, because he actually trips and falls, and then he gives it to Charles Smith. Charles Smith actually gets blocked 4 times by Scottie Pippen. He tries to go up again and again and again, and just can't throw it down. A lot of people were just under the assumption that if Smith was a strong player, if he was a tough player, he would have had the ability just to go up and just dunk it, because the guy's almost 7 feet tall. He's a very highly skilled player, but for whatever reason, he just went up a little bit soft. And Scottie Pippen got the last laugh, and the Bulls go to Chicago and finish out the series. It's just one of those things. They could just never get by Jordan for whatever the reason. And then the very next season, Jordan actually goes to play baseball. He retires. It's funny, both times when Jordan retired in the 90s, the Knicks actually went on to at least get to the NBA Finals. I'll say that. So the 93-94 season it's really interesting. Probably the most newsworthy thing about the regular season was Doc Rivers actually tears his ACL in December. I remember that game, and then all of a sudden the Knicks just felt like they needed to make a move and get another point guard. They actually bring in Derek Harper from the Dallas Mavericks. Harper was, you almost get the feeling that this was a Riley decision. Dallas actually did take the Lakers 7 games in the 1988 Western Conference Finals, so in some ways it did feel like a natural move. And Harper was actually great for the Knicks. I mean, a lot of people feel like if the Knicks won the NBA Finals this year, Harper would have gotten the MVP. I remember hearing that several times. But yeah, the 93-94 Knicks, they didn't finish with the best record in the East that year. It was actually Atlanta. But I remember in February that year, February of 94, I had some really, bad days at school that year. So I do remember sitting in my computer class. I actually did get in trouble that month from that computer teacher. We played that Oregon Trail game, and I remember I wrote something fresh on the tombstone after you stopped playing the game. I got sent to the office. So I do remember that, but I also remember thinking one of those days about how badly the Knicks were playing. I was like, man, they shot 28% against the Sonics. Then they went out on a West Coast trip, and they lost like almost every single game on the West Coast. And during that trip, Riley actually decided to give each player $500, and then they made a stop in Reno, Nevada, and everyone just gambled away $500 of Riley's money. So in total, Riley actually just gave away $10,000 to the team just to kind of boost their spirits. He was actually going to make a change in the starting lineup, so that kind of softened the blow to make the change in the starting lineup, and it really turned things around. I remember the Knicks actually went on a 15-game winning streak. And then when they got to the playoffs, they actually beat the Nets in the first round, who they had a tough time with. I actually went to a Nets home game where they destroyed the Knicks. I think it was like on February 15th of 94. Yeah, that Net team was actually really good, too. They had Derek Coleman and Kenny Anderson, very underrated Nets team. So they beat the Nets in the first round. They beat the Bulls finally in the second round of the playoffs. That was the Scottie Pippen Tony Kukoc game. But yeah, Pippen played great though. If you take away that Tony Kukoc shot, Pippen actually played really well. I mean, the Bulls were probably the better team throughout the first 5 games. But when you get to Game 7, though, for whatever reason, the Bulls couldn't put the ball in the basket in that fourth quarter. And then Ewing, it almost felt like a championship with the way Ewing celebrated. He said, yeah, we just kicked some ass. And they almost celebrated like they won the championship. I remember Pippen actually had 4-Pete written on his sneakers that year, but it just wasn't going to happen. But, I'll probably touch on that in the Scottie Pippen book. But yeah. And then we have the Indiana Pacers series. So this Pacers series in 1994, this has got to be, this had to be the best series that the Knicks ever had in the playoffs in the 90s. It's definitely the most roller coaster ride of a series you would have ever seen. And I'll tell you about, man, even though I was a huge Knicks fan at the time, the Knicks are my team. After Jordan retired, I decided to become a Knicks fan. A lot of it just had to do with television. They're the only team you could watch on TV every night. You couldn't even watch the Nets every night. For some reason, you had to buy the Net games on pay-per-view, which makes no sense. But everybody pretty much got MSG. I guess because Cablevision had a deal with Madison Square Garden as part ownership at the time. Maybe that's why. But yeah, when you get to Game 5, I've never seen anything like it. Like the Knicks are up by 20 points. Then all of a sudden, Reggie Miller starts trash talking with Spike Lee during the game. It's almost like, it's crazy, man. We talk about zones. Reggie Miller was in 2 zones at the same time. He was in a trash talking zone. We saw White Man Can't Jump about how you could get in the zone with trash talking. So he's talking trash to Spike Lee and basically just kind of uses him. It's just a way to get going. And Reggie Miller scores 25 points in the fourth quarter, single-handedly brings Indiana back on the offensive end. On the defensive end, though, what people forget, if you watch the game, the reason the Knicks dug themselves a hole was they just couldn't, give Ewing like a decent pass. Like every single time someone tried to feed it to Ewing, he just got denied. It was actually LaSalle Thompson that kept on stealing the ball from Ewing. It was just telegraph pass after telegraph pass to Ewing. And ultimately, that's kind of the underrated part there. But what Reggie did was unbelievable. It's my favorite basketball game of all time because I've never seen anything like it. It's just one of those moments where just something magical just happened between Reggie and the Garden that night. And it just, I remember at the time I was depressed. I couldn't get to sleep. I had just bought in Snoop's Doggy Style on cassette. I remember I just listened to the tape over and over again until I could get to sleep. But yeah, I'll tell you what though, game 6 of that year, that had to be probably the biggest gut check I think the Knicks have ever had during this whole 90s run. I really feel like that Game 6 in Indiana, that was probably the biggest victory because when you look at Games 3 and Game 4, there was one game when Ewing only had 1 point. And Indiana just destroyed them in some of those games. I mean, the Knicks couldn't put the ball in the basket in Indiana. So I wasn't really feeling that confident, in that Game 6 going into Indiana. I remember Spike Lee showed up at the game. There was like a lot of racist remarks to Spike. I think Spike even said that he felt like he was at a Klan rally. So that was kind of funny. But what saved Spike Lee's ass that game was John Starks. Starks just caught fire. And for whatever reason, the Knicks just had laser focus that game. And those are just one of those games where Starks just delivered. Like sometimes when the game, Starks would have really bad games in the finals against Houston in Game 7. Obviously, that was bad. But this Game 6 in Indiana, you got to give Starks credit. He had the ability to carry a team and take over a game and, take the big shot. And, he was great in that game. You just remember Starks and Spike Lee just, slapping 5 over and over again at the end of that game. And then obviously Game 7, they just barely win in New York, though. Starks goes for a layup. He misses it. And Ewing just slams it home and the Knicks pretty much win, and Ewing has both arms up in the air as he celebrates with the Garden. It's almost like you wish he would have saved that for the real championship, not the Eastern Conference Finals. But ultimately, the Knicks would play the Rockets in the finals that year, and I've always said this is like the curse of OJ. When I look at the Knicks and Rockets, though, like it's Hakeem's team of supporting players versus Patrick Ewing's team of supporting players. This was one situation where I don't think either team had multiple superstars, so it's pretty much a straight up wash. I mean, really, it's just it really is almost like a game of one-on-one between Ewing and Olajuwon. It's not like either team had more talent than the other. So that's the interesting thing about this, NBA Finals. I do feel like Hakeem probably got a little bit more out of his role players than Ewing did out of the Knicks. I mean, besides Harper and besides Starks, I can't say that there was really that one Knick that really shined brighter than anybody. If Ewing probably was not going to win the MVP, so you can't say that Ewing didn't get any help. But for whatever reason, it did feel like Hakeem got a little bit more variety out of the supporting players. Like you had Robert Horry step up, you had Sam Cassell hit a game-winning shot, you had Kenny Smith had his big game. It seemed like each and every player had their turn to shine for the Rockets as opposed to the Knicks, who probably were a little bit more inconsistent throughout the whole series as a whole. And I think also Olajuwon definitely did get the better of Ewing within this series. It was really Mason that made Olajuwon work a lot harder than anyone. Olajuwon even stated that Mason was kicking his ass with just the physicality and his size and everything. So. But yeah, with this series right here, I've stated it before. It's like the curse of O.J. Simpson. I mean, to think about it, the Knicks have a Game 5 at home at MSG. They're about to take a 3-2 lead, and then you can't even watch the game because of the O.J. Simpson Bronco chase. So the funny thing is here, and I guess this came out, I think Bob Costas actually did an interview about this before the book was written. It came out that O.J. and Al Cowens tried to make a call to Costas during the Bronco chase or during the actual game. So it would have been really cool if Costas had his cell phone with him at the time, because this is before cell phones. Apparently, OJ tried to call someone at the technical office of Bob Costas, and the guy thought it was a prank call. He said, yeah, right, you're not OJ Simpson. But OJ was trying to communicate with Costas, so it really would have been like, that would have taken that Bronco chase to like another level if OJ had confessed to Costas or gave him information that people were dying to see. But yeah, that's always something to think about right there. But yeah, it really did suck for the Knicks. All the focus was off of the game. Obviously, Costas, knew OJ well, so he wasn't interested in the game. Kenny Smith was even distracted during the actual game. So, and then when you look at the arena, apparently the fans were more engaged with the OJ chase than the actual game. I had a friend, I've talked about him before. His name is Kevin Chisholm. I mentioned him in that Sam Jackson video. And he was actually at a bar that night, and it was funny because the Knicks had this phrase that when people would chant, "Go New York, go New York, go." So it was like, "Go New York, go New York, go." And then when OJ come on the screen, it was like, "Now go OJ, go OJ, go." So that was pretty funny. But yeah, I think the OJ thing was a big distraction. But more than anything, I think this 2-3-2. Format really did hurt the Knicks. I feel like if it was 2-2-1-1-1, where, 2 games in Houston, 2 games in New York, and then 1 in Houston, 1 in New York, 1 in Houston, I think it would have benefited them. This 2-3-2 format is like, all right, the Knicks go up 3-2, but now you have to win a game in Houston. It's like, it's tough, man. Because if you don't win that game 6, it's like, man, now you have the pressure to win a game 7. So Starks played really well in this series. He really did. He had some great fourth quarters. He actually got up a shot at the end of game 6, but Olajuwon just barely blocked it. And who knows, if that shot goes in, it changes everything. But, you give Hakeem credit. Give Hakeem credit for a great shot. And apparently that whole night, they were in Houston from Sunday to Wednesday. Apparently it was humid as hell. It was hot as hell. Mike and the Mad Dog were there, and they dreaded, I think it was Mike Francesa. He dreaded being there. It was like, it took like forever just to get on with game 7. And apparently like Starks couldn't get any sleep. Like he said, all he did was think about the game, couldn't wait for the game to start. And then Starks actually ends up, shooting a 2 for 19, a miserable game. And people have always asked me, how come Pat Riley did not put Rolando Blackman in the game? So Rolando Blackman is on the bench here. This is the 1987 NBA All-Star Game MVP, maybe the best NBA All-Star Game of all time, where you got the best of the 70s and guys like Dr. J meeting the best of the 80s with Magic, Bird, Jordan, Barkley, Ewing. It really did, watching that game, he hits the 2 clutch free throws. You see him mouth the words, confidence, baby, confidence. I mean, what an ending that would have been if you put Rolando Blackman in that game. And he actually retired after this game too. And he ends his career by just saying confidence, baby, confidence. And he hits one of the game-winning shots for the Knicks, and the Knicks win the NBA championship. However, though, I think Pat Riley made the right call. The reason why Riley didn't want to play Rolando Blackman in the 1994 NBA Finals, before they go to Houston, Rolando Blackman actually asked Riley, can we bring our wives with us? They've been supportive the whole year. It'd be nice if we could finally start bringing our wives to travel with us. And Riley just said no. He said, no, we're not going to change the rules now. He's like, rules are the rules. And Riley was actually kind of held it against Rolando for actually asking if they could bring the wives with them. I guess at the time, Riley was more gung-ho. I don't know if Riley's kind of changed his stance on having the wives come to the game, but I can see Riley's point of view there. And I would actually agree with Riley. I think you need to stick with who got you there. Starks played great in that Game 6 against Indiana. He was, to me, he wasn't, obviously Ewing was the best player, but really, like nobody had more heart than John Starks. So you got to ride with what got you there. Starks was definitely the most athletic player, the guy that could take a game over at any second. So, yeah, I mean, the 2 for 19, it's something that is always going to stick with Starks, and I don't think he really ever recovered from it. And, it's a shame. But for whatever reason, for as bad as he shot that game, and for as much as people do, take jabs at Starks about saying, "Oh, I'm shooting 2 for 19. This is like Starks-like." Starks-like has become, instead of knowing Starks for the greatness of his game, you when people say Starks-like, you almost think of the 2 for 19. But for whatever reason, when Starks comes back to the Garden, when he comes back for any function, he's always very warmly received. And a lot of it is he just had so much passion. He had so much heart. He had so much will to win that you almost, it's almost like the 2 for 19. It was symbolic of him just trying a little bit too hard than not trying at all. Like, if that makes any sense. Charles Smith would be the opposite. It's like, oh, Charles Smith is a pussy. He's too soft. He's to this, he's to that, but Starks really wanted to win. It's just he wanted a little bit too bad that he just shot like shit. So yeah, I mean, it's depressing, man. That Game 7 in Houston's depressing. I kind of knew after Game 6, I just didn't have a lot of confidence. I remember I couldn't even stay up for that Game 7. And, watching it back, you see Riley and Ewing just with their heads down, walking into the locker room. It sucks, man. Riley even says, like, he wished he could have just done one more thing just to get that team ready. But yeah, I mean, things kind of took a turn for the worst after that in terms of Riley just, being a little bit fed up with the ownership situation. Apparently, like he was under the impression that he was going to be reimbursed for giving the team $10,000. So they actually had a meeting where they were talking about the changes in ownership. So at this time, I believe Dolan and Cablevision, or Dolan's family, they owned 15% of the team. And the other 85% was actually owned by ITT. And one time they were at a meeting and Riley just said, "Hi, I'm Pat Riley. I'm coach of the New York Knicks. And someone here actually owes me $10,000. And it was just so awkward. They were like, well, why would anybody owe you $10,000? And Checkets' reasoning was, the reason we never paid Pat back was we didn't know how to write it off. We didn't know how to explain this to the multiple ownerships about how we could write off this expense. He said, looking back on it, if I would have just paid him the $10,000 back myself if I had been thinking. But ultimately, that was one of the cracks that led Riley to leaving the Knicks and wanted to pursue getting ownership with the Miami Heat. He actually asked. The guy's name was Araskog from ITT. He actually had a meeting with him and asked him if he could get like 20% ownership with the team. And he just said, Pat, I know why you're here. Well, I'm just going to let you know we're not going to give you ownership. It's too complicated of a deal. It's complicated because it was a dual ownership with the Knicks. At the time, I think 15% Cablevision, 85% ITT. It was just unrealistic to make it happen. So Riley actually had dinner, I believe, in Aspen, Colorado, with the guy that actually knew Mickey Harrison of the Miami Heat. And then later on that year, he met with Mickey. And then after the Knicks actually lost in the playoffs to Indiana in Game 7 at the Garden, when Riley was on the team bus, he actually called Mickey Harrison and just said, can we work out a deal with Miami, with ownership? He said, I'm sick of it. I'm sick of New York. I'm sick of the tabloids. I'm sick of the papers. I'm sick of all the lying. He was upset at Checkets, too, because Checkets, they just didn't come through with a lot of promises that he made. I think Riley wanted more power. He wanted more say over basketball decisions. So all that really did lead into Riley, leaving the Knicks and joining the Miami Heat. Okay, so Riley officially faxes his resignation to the Knicks during the summer of 1995, and he takes a deal with the Miami Heat to become the head coach, president of basketball operations. At the same time, he actually gets a percentage of ownership. Riley was just very demanding. He wanted to be rewarded for his success. I think Mickey Harrison he actually owned the Carnival cruises, and he was under the impression that Riley could definitely turn this thing around and make the Miami Heat a profitable franchise. And it really did pay off. It really did pay off. Even with the Alonzo Mourning years. They finished with the best record in the East for many, many years, including the lockout season. And then obviously they won a championship with Dwayne Wade, and they were able to trade for Shaq. And then obviously you had the LeBron and Chris Bosh and Dwayne Wade little dynasty last decade. So you can't say that Riley, bringing in Pat Riley, has not paid dividends. It has. It was a great move. But Riley was very demanding. He wanted all his taxes paid for and multiple homes. Even with the Knicks, he wanted them to acquire a book deal, a movie deal. I don't remember the movie, but he did do the Winter Within, the book. God, the list goes on and on. He just had so many requests. He even requested them to do his own, to have them do his laundry. So lots and lots of different requests. But that was Pat Riley. He was like, are you in or are you out? If you don't think I'm worth it, then you're not in. Even the situation that he had with Dave Checkets, he was talking to Checkets, the president of the Knicks, throughout this whole run. His wife wanted to buy a car, some type of Chevy Suburban or whatever, and she was going to buy green. And then he was like, what, are you kidding me? Green is the Celtics. It's like, all right, I'll get red then. He's like, red? No, not red. Red is the Bulls. And then he's like, all right, make sure you get a blue one. So that's just the way Riley was wired. Are you in or you out? That type of thing. So so Riley is off to the Miami Heat. So with the Knicks have a vacant coaching spot. So Van Gundy does not get the job right away. Van Gundy does not take over until March of 1996. But the Knicks actually bring in Don Nelson. Lots of interesting things about Don Nelson here. And it's funny. It's like Don Nelson is the guy that changed the league. Like, he wanted the big man to carry the ball up the court. Look at what he did with Dirk Nowitzki and the Dallas Mavericks. Like, this new age level of basketball where the 7-foot big man is actually shooting threes. And he was into not drilling the Knicks too hard. He was really more into finesse. Kind of taking it easy on players. Not drilling them to death like Pat Riley, kind of like the opposite of Pat Riley. But yeah, this did not work out very well. He actually tried making Patrick Ewing like a point forward, and he tried making Anthony Mason like more of a focal point of the offense with the ball handling, and it just didn't work out that well. The Knicks actually were trying to hire Chuck Daly. And it's funny, Daly actually turned down the job, but then he called back 48 hours later after they hired Nelson. He says, the job's still available? And they said, nah, we already gave it to Don Nelson. But that would have been tailor-made for Chuck Daly. This was like him taking over the bad boy, a new and improved version of the bad boy Pistons, a team that was ready to win now. And it almost made too much sense. You almost wish that they would have hired Chuck Daly there, but everything works out for a reason. I'm glad that Van Gundy got the job halfway through the season. So the problem with Don Nelson was he made way too many mistakes. Probably the biggest reason he got fired was he was trying to pull off a trade for Shaq. He wanted to trade Ewing for Shaq, and at the time, like looking back on it, it seemed reasonable. You know, Shaq was 10 years younger. He had more to give, but for whatever reason, the Knicks were just adamant that you can't trade Ewing. And then when Ewing found out about that, he actually said, yeah, well, you know, he'd be down to see Don Nelson get fired. On top of that, too, he really shook up John Starks' confidence. And Starks' confidence issues were building when Riley was still there. Riley actually benched him during Christmas time with the Knicks. I was actually at one of those games, and a lot of the teammates, because of how he performed in that Game 7 in Houston, they started kind of alienating him. So yeah, Starks was definitely having some confidence issues. Don Nelson actually was in favor of starting Hubert Davis over John Starks. And we know Hubert Davis now. He's the head coach at North Carolina. And he's actually done a really good job. He's really transformed his personality, Hubert Davis, as a coach, especially for North Carolina. Last year they had an incredible run, if you remember. But at this time with the Knicks, Hubert Davis had a reputation of being a deer in the headlights, meaning that he would like freeze under pressure. And he just wasn't Starks. He wasn't as multidimensional as Starks, where he could play defense, handle the ball, take over a game at any given moment. So yeah, Don Nelson was actually quoted as saying Hubert is the better player. So yeah, you just had too many guys against him. Plus, on top of that, there'd be these games where I think it was one game at Golden State. That was where Don Nelson, that was his previous stop, where he didn't get along with Chris Webber at Golden State. So they actually do beat Golden State. So Nelson was out partying after the game, and the team was actually waiting for him on the bus for like 2 hours, and then he comes on the bus all drunk. So that was another reason why the Knicks kind of turned their back on Nelson. And then there was so he actually started playing Mason like over 40 minutes a game, started having him be the ball handler. He actually wanted Ewing to do more ball handling, but that didn't work out. Ewing was just too clumsy to be the type of guy that had any ball handling responsibilities. But there was actually a couple of games where he took Mason out of the game late in the game. This is after Mason was already playing 40 minutes. And then when he took Mason out of the game, Mason threatened to kill him. He said, if you take me out of the coach again, I'll fucking kill you. So you have all these different things going on with Don Nelson. Then obviously the Knicks went on a really bad losing streak. Spike Lee, I remember, this wasn't even in the book, but Spike Lee was quoted as saying, I was at the Clipper game. They actually lost to the Clippers at that time, which was really embarrassing. And Spike Lee just said, after the Clipper game, I knew that was the nail in the coffin. So they made the change. And Jeff Van Gundy was definitely more like Pat Riley. So Van Gundy was quoted as saying, the last thing our guys want to be is commended for their efforts and commended for playing hard. I mean, these guys want to win, and these guys want to win big. And, so Van Gundy was definitely, he was all about winning. I love Van Gundy. Van Gundy really reminds me of my freshman coach, DiVincenzo. His name was John DiVincenzo. They just got so many things about them that they have in common. And I almost wish I had really fought for that guy to become varsity coach, because he was all about winning. I remember beginning of the year, like, he didn't really know much about me. I didn't come into the season with as much hype as some of the other kids from the area, but by the end of the season, I could just tell, like, we had the best connection on that team. He was all about winning, and Van Gundy was the same way. It was whatever you can do to win. He didn't play any favorites. I mean, he really did have a deep connection to Oakley, which almost got him fired after they traded Oakley in '99 for Marcus Camby. But other than that, I feel like Van Gundy is really, one of those coaches that would just do anything to win. Whether it be coming early, watching footage, he was just had such an amazing work ethic when you hear about everything that Van Gundy did. So yeah, so this '95-'96 season, it wasn't really nothing memorable about it. They ended up losing to the Bulls in the second round in 5 games. It really was probably one of the more forgettable seasons that the Knicks had. But the very next year, though, they actually traded Anthony Mason for Larry Johnson in the offseason. They actually signed Allen Houston. And all of a sudden, this '96-'97 team, this was kind of like, the best of the early '90s merging with the 1999 Knicks to a degree. You almost probably had the most talented team, with Ewing almost still in the latter stages of his prime right here. So this '96-'97 Knicks team, a lot of people say this would have been the best Knicks team. And you almost feel like Van Gundy has nightmares to this day about what happened this year. So this is the fight that really changed everything here. So they're actually up 3-1 on Miami. They're clicking on all cylinders. Allen Houston is having an incredible series. Bringing in LJ was huge. LJ really had a disappointing season because he just wasn't more of a scorer like he was in Charlotte. But still, this Knicks team was just, they just had the most, I think they've had the most talent during this '97 run. So they're up 3-1. They're losing to Miami, but then all of a sudden, I think, who is it? It's Charlie Ward actually boxes out P.J. Brown a little bit too hard. And then P.J. Brown of the Miami Heat actually takes Charlie Ward and actually backflips him. And then Ewing actually gets off the bench in a brain-dead fog, gets suspended for getting off the bench. And then I think LJ gets suspended. I think Starks gets suspended. And it's just, it totally ends the series right there. They could have won that series in 6 games. They end up losing to Miami in 7 games. Miami doesn't even put a fight up against the Bulls in the Eastern Conference Finals. I believe someone even stated that Jordan thought this Knicks team was their best team. And he was actually, someone even said that he was actually scared of them with how talented they were. So we'll never know. That definitely is one that got away from them without a doubt. And then they had a fight again the very next year in the playoffs. So Ewing actually fractures his wrist right before Christmas in a game in Milwaukee. And it's funny, they talked about how Ewing always hated Milwaukee because he thought the hotel was haunted. But it's funny, he ends up getting almost a career-ending injury in Milwaukee. So he actually goes for an alley-oop. The guy named Andrew Lang actually tackles him in midair, and he comes down and he crushes his wrist. His wrist was in pretty bad shape. It was almost the equivalent of someone, getting into a bad car wreck, life-threatening, car accident. So, yeah, I mean, it's almost like his wrist never fully healed. It was never really quite the same. Pretty much ends up missing the whole season. He actually does come back for the playoffs once they get to the second round against Indiana. But the funny thing is that first round of the playoffs, it was actually 2 versus 7. The Knicks were the 7th seed, and they play Miami. But this time, the fight actually ends up benefiting the Knicks. So LJ and Alonzo Mourning get into a fight. And, when both guys were with Charlotte, Larry Johnson and Alonzo, they decided to pay Larry $82 million for 12 seasons. At the time, the biggest contract in sports history, or at least the biggest in basketball history. So they never came to a deal with Alonzo. So that really started a rift between them, and it sucks. That's what sucks about sports, is how money can destroy these friendships, or can destroy what could have possibly been, one of the powerhouses of the '90s with the Charlotte Hornets. So all of a sudden, right before the end of the game, Alonzo and Larry are just, giving each other punches. They're both missing each other. Then all of a sudden, Van Gundy jumps on Alonzo Mourning's calf. And it's almost like he just didn't want to see any of these fights happen again. But ultimately, it ended up benefiting the Knicks because losing Alonzo was a lot bigger of a blow than losing LJ. And the Knicks actually win that series in 5 games in Miami. But yeah, that 97-98 season, they obviously just weren't good enough. Ewing coming back against Indiana, he just wasn't the Ewing of old. And yeah, I mean, that the Indiana team in 98 was great. I mean, they pushed the Bulls to 7 games. So obviously they didn't have a chance against Indiana. But Ernie Grunfeld actually said that he felt like Marcus Camby would be the answer and would be the one to get the Knicks over Indiana and get them over the hump and into the NBA Finals. And that's exactly what happened the very next year. So, yeah, during the offseason that year, there was an NBA lockout. Ewing was actually president of the Players Association. And, yeah, I mean, when you don't know if there's going to be a season or not, it's got to be tough to work out. It's got to be tough to stay motivated and really, stay disciplined. So Ewing actually put on 20 pounds that offseason, and it put a lot of pressure on his Achilles. And, ultimately he ended up partially rupturing his Achilles when you get to the playoffs of that year. But, yeah, that 99 team, they just got off to a slow start. It was tough because Van Gundy didn't trust Camby. Van Gundy was really partial to Charles Oakley. He did not want Oakley to be traded. So that kind of created a rift between Van Gundy and the general manager at the time, who was Ernie Grunfeld. And, they actually decided to bring in Latrell Sprewell. So just a little bit of background information. So the season before, when Sprewell was in Golden State, there was actually a practice where he actually choked at his coach, PJ Carlissimo. PJ actually said to Sprewell, "Spree, give a crisper pass." And then Sprewell was like, "Man, what the fuck do you want from me?" And then he started choking him out. He had scars all over his neck. And then, Sprewell actually got suspended for that whole season. He lost a lot of money and the Knicks were the only team interested. They decided that Starks' tenure in New York had pretty much ran its course. Van Gundy gave up on Starks when Starks actually came to Indiana with golf clubs. That's a pretty well-documented story, and a lot of people just thought Starks had lost his passion for the game and was more passionate about the sport of golf. Van Gundy even had a picture of Starks playing golf on his in his office wall, and Starks was like, "Well, what the hell is this?" And Van Gundy's like, "I figured I'd put up a picture of the sport you're most passionate about." And that was pretty much the exodus for Starks. So Starks was packaged in a deal to send him back to Golden State, and then the Knicks got Latrell Sprewell. And it's funny, Sprewell coming to the Knicks, it got off to a shaky start. I mean, him and Camby really didn't fit in. The Knicks had a tough season offensively. They ended up just barely making the playoffs as the 8th seed. But for whatever reason, I just believed in the team. It really did feel like a super team. When you look at Allen Houston, Marcus Camby, the guy that made John Calipari's career in college. You still had Ewing. Obviously, Ewing is not in his prime anymore, but he's still Patrick Ewing. Then you got Sprewell. Then you still got Larry Johnson. I mean, you just had they had a shitload of talent, and they were nowhere near an 8th seed. But the problem is they just took it forever to get it going. I remember one regular season game where they actually did play well. I said to myself, "Man, this team should win the NBA championship with all the talent they had." And this guy on my team, I got to say, at the time he was the best player on my freshman team. He decided to do a pool. And I remember, I was the only one that actually had the Knicks winning the championship, going to the finals. And he looks at me and he says, "You sure about this? Worst team in the playoffs? You really sure about this?" And I'm like, "Man, I just have a weird feeling." And it was crazy. It was an incredible run. They actually beat Miami in the first round. Once again, going head to head with Riley in the first round of the playoffs. They actually win in 5 games. And goddamn, it was weird. Something about that first game. They actually won the first game in Miami, and I had a sense that, man, I just feel like this is bringing back memories of '94. It just feels like they're on the verge of something special. And when you get to Game 5, they're actually down by 1 with 4 seconds left, and they run a play called triangle down. Ewing sets a screen to get Allen Houston open. Allen Houston actually gets past Dan Marley, and he hits a running little jumper that just rims in. And it's funny, I forget how close that Terry Porter shot was. So Miami has 0.8 seconds to try to win this series. Terry Porter takes a dribble and shoots a three. I thought it was always from full court, but this was like right by the 3-point line. And then so he misses the shot, but after the game is over, Van Gundy goes up to the referee. I think it was Bill Oakes. And he just goes like, "No fucking way. No fucking way. You can't be able to take a dribble and shoot a shot with 0.8 seconds left." Instead of celebrating, Van Gundy is so stressed out about losing his job that he decides to keep arguing with the referee. So, but that was an incredible victory. That's definitely up there with one of the most exhilarating Knicks victories, with Allen Houston hitting that shot and then pumping his fist to end that game. So I love the 1999 Knicks. This is probably my favorite Knicks run. Something about this team. The team was just more athletic than they were in the past. More multi-dimensional offensively. You know, the LJ sign. It just really felt like everybody was connecting with the Knicks. And Sprewell as well. The Sprewell story is terrific, man. I mean, I remember him just coming off the bench as the sixth man, and people would just get so excited, and he really kind of changed the perception. He wasn't like this thug or this villain that choked at his coach. During the playoffs right here, everyone just saw him as an equal. They just saw him as Latrell Sprewell. It's funny how quickly things turned around. Like when you're winning, it's crazy. I remember after an AAU game, these two AAU coaches are talking to each other. I actually played for both coaches. So Jack, one guy's name is Jack. He actually goes like, hey Kevin, how do you like my Sprewell? He's talking about this black kid named Carl, because he made a couple of threes, and he's like, yeah, he could shoot that three better than Spree. So it's like, yeah, we're talking about Sprewell's basketball ability, and we're not even 2 years removed from him choking out his coach. And when Sprewell choked out his coach, he was like public enemy number one. He was like, no one's going to want to play with this guy again. This guy's career is over. But look at how quickly Sprewell turned everything around. Slam actually put him on the cover. How Latrell Sprewell saved the NBA that summer. So that was pretty fascinating. But yeah, the story of the 99 playoffs was really Van Gundy. Just Van Gundy's stress level. Checkets actually took a meeting with Phil Jackson. So Phil was actually contemplating coming to the Knicks. So Checkets actually lies to the media and says that he never had the conversation with Phil. Checkers said that he decided to lie about it just to diffuse the situation, which is understandable. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I've lied in certain situations where I just didn't want things to blow up and people to get hurt. So I could definitely see where Checkers is coming from. But I think people really kind of connected with Van Gundy. They saw how hard he was working and how much passion he had for this Knicks team, that when they were on the verge of sweeping Atlanta, they were just chanting, Jeff Van Gundy, Jeff Van Gundy. And you could tell he was getting really emotional. His wife actually started crying. He kept sipping the Diet Coke just so people wouldn't see his tears. Yeah, I mean, it was crazy. And then you love Ewing's reaction to the Jeff Van Gundy chance. Ewing really pushed for Van Gundy, to stay on the team, because they thought about firing him. It was either going to be him or Grunfeld, and they chose to fire Ernie Grunfeld. So this is what makes Dolan look really bad. So Dolan was actually on the verge of becoming the sole owner of the team around this time. And because the Rangers weren't going to make the playoffs, it was decided that, the Knicks aren't doing very well. We need to make a move just to prove a point. So they decided to fire Ernie Grunfeld, which looked really bad. This is a really bad decision because the Knicks did exactly what Ernie envisioned. Even Marcus Camby said, Ernie told me, you're going to be the guy that gets us over Indiana, over the hump and into the finals. And that's exactly what happened. And for some reason, they fired the guy before the season even ended. And that was a bad move. So that move is indicative of the dysfunction that Dolan has casted over this franchise since 1999. So good job, Jim Dolan. Great move right there. You look like a fucking genius. But yeah, man, that Atlanta series, what really stands out about it, if you haven't seen it yet, check out those games in Atlanta. The Atlanta fan base was so different back then. They didn't give two shits about the Hawks. It was mostly Knicks fans. I just remember Camby and Sprewell. Some of the dunks that they had, just the fans going crazy. At that time, I just think a lot of people kind of migrated from New York to Atlanta. But, I think we live in a day now where a lot of guys just kind of grew up in Atlanta, and Atlanta's kind of like the city they grew up in. So it's a totally different fan base now with, Trae Young's version of the Hawks, where, their fan base is actually really good against the Knicks the last time they played in the playoffs. But yeah, the Indiana series was crazy. Ewing actually partially tears his Achilles in game 2. The Knicks are actually tied at 1. Game 3 is always going to be the most memorable game of the series. They, Larry Johnson actually hits a 3, and they call a foul, so it ends up being a 4-point play. It's one of the best moments in Garden history. It was great for me. I was always a huge Larry Johnson fan, so even going back to the Charlotte days. So for him to get that big of a game altering or series altering play was just huge. I remember at AAU games that season, a lot of people started doing the LJ sign. LJ started doing this sign, and he called it the LJ sign. I remember one time my coach was so embarrassed. He was like, guys, could you stop it with the LJ sign? It just kind of became a thing. But yeah, you always remember that series for the Larry Johnson play. And when you get to Game 6, though, it was really Allen Houston that sealed the deal. I believe his wife actually gave birth the day before, and he actually just had a really good game. I think he had 36 points. He held Reggie Miller to a really bad shooting night. So yeah, man, Reggie had given the Knicks some nightmares. The Game 5 in '94, the 25 points in the fourth quarter, also the 8 points in 8 seconds, which I forgot to talk about, was just a sign that the Riley era had ended in New York with that Game 1 in '95. If you haven't seen that yet, that is probably the most miraculous 8 seconds in NBA history right there. But yeah, Reggie just didn't have the magic in 1999. He would get his revenge in 2000 though. And the Knicks would actually go on to the NBA Finals and lose to the San Antonio Spurs. They didn't have Ewing. They were trying to have Larry Johnson with his jersey tucked into his jockstrap, and he was battling through bad back and bad knees trying to guard Tim Duncan. It just didn't work out well. They even tried to put Chris Dudley against David Robinson. And the Spurs are just too good. At that time, they just had the young Duncan mixed in with all these veteran role players and great coaching by Popovich. And it was just, unless the Knicks were causing ruckus in terms of turning the ball over and just, outscoring them every single step of the way. I mean, Sprewell had to have the game of his life in Game 5, but it still just wasn't enough. I mean, Duncan and Sprewell actually had a pretty awesome duel in Game 5. I remember Allen Houston had a really good game in Game 3, but those first 2 games in San Antonio, they were just duds. The Knicks just couldn't put the ball in the basket. They were just kind of boring games. I mean, yeah, Duncan was just dominant, man. He was just really dominant. You even ask yourself, like, would this version of Duncan have given Jordan and the Bulls a run for their money? I would say, yeah. I would say they would have a tough time with Duncan right there. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. That's the 1990s New York Knicks. Really enjoyed talking about this. So, I mean, a couple things. You really learn a lot about Riley and his mindset, how competitive he is, how he was wired. I mean, he even said, I forgot to mention this, but during the preseason with the Knicks, when he first got there, the first couple of days of training camp or the preseason, there was a white guy on the team. I don't think he actually made the team, but he said to him, I think you're white. I think you're white middle class, and I don't think you're hungry. Like, he would just be that blunt with talking to guys. So it's almost like it's mind-blowing how competitive Riley was. You learn about how stressed out Van Gundy was. I mean, it doesn't make Checkets look good either. A big part of Riley for wanting to leave the Knicks was just the negativity in the tabloids, but also all the lying from Checkets as well. But I think when you look at Riley's beef with the Knicks and his gripes, a lot of it just had to do with dual ownership. With Mickey Arison with Miami Heat, it was just one owner. So it's a little bit easier to give out partial ownership if if it's just one guy running the show. But because it's a corporate entity and, ITT and 50% owned by Cablevision, it's just really tough to compensate someone with an ownership deal in that situation. Obviously, he tried to get ownership with the Knicks, but they didn't give it to him. A lot of people say the Knicks should have gave Riley ownership, and they should have. They really should have. But at that time, it was just such a headache. How could you do it with two corporations that owned the team like that? So that's another thing you take away from it. What else did I want to say about that? Yeah, I mean, it was just an incredible run, though, man. Like, even though they didn't win a championship, you just love a lot of these guys. You really do. You love Starks, you love Ewing, you love Oakley, you love Mason. You know, the I didn't really go into depth about it, but you just realize how much of a polarizing figure, Mason was. Constantly getting suspended by Riley for conduct detrimental to the team. Lots of fantasies with women here. You definitely get the feeling like Mason was crazy about women. He had a lot of fantasies and sexcapades, as some people would say. And it's coming out now that Biggie's song about the Knicks player coming home and finding him having sex, it was actually Anthony Mason. A lot of people thought it was Starks, but no, it was actually Mason. And it does make sense when you hear about Mason's backstory here. But yeah, lots of good things to learn from this book. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the review. That's Blood in the Garden. I do think a lot of the fights are what's going to sell the book, but to me that wasn't the most interesting thing. I think the most interesting thing was just Riley's situation, his competitive drive, him turning the thing around. The biggest fight that I didn't talk about was the Phoenix fight. There was actually a regular season game in Phoenix where I believe it was Kevin Johnson just hit a really hard pick on Doc Rivers. And then Greg Anthony in street clothes just comes out swinging. Riley actually rips his Armani pants. Oh, man, it was ugly. That had to be the worst fight I think the Knicks have ever had. But it seems to me like the fights are they're really promoting to sell the book. But yeah, the JoJo English fight with Derek Harper, that was a nasty takedown. And because it was in front of David Stern and an NBC executive, that's what made it look really bad. And, they did want to change. They were constantly changing the rules during this decade as well. I mean, in 1995, they moved the three-point line closer. They took away hand checking. So they almost altered the rules because of the Knicks. So that's another thing to keep in mind when reading this book. But yeah, obviously the fights with Van Gundy, the fights against Miami were series-altering fights. So you get the feeling that Van Gundy has become a great commentator because he's been so stressed out about how some of those fights came out. You almost get that feeling. But yeah, man, a great book. Great job to Chris Herren as well. You really can't appreciate how much work he put in until you read this whole thing and see some of the the sources in the back of the book about how much time and effort actually went into this thing. So good job to Chris Herren. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'm out. All right.